गोरखा सैनिक कोटमा कटकमा कैलाश का कूटमा गंगा का तटमा हिमाल मुकुटमा राष्ट्र ध्वजा भोटमा हल्ली हल्ली बतासले विजय का बाजा सितै तालमा लम्क्यो लम्की रहो सदा अटल होस शार्दूल का गंगा का तटमा हिमाल मुकुटमा राष्ट्र ध्वजा भोटमा हल्ली हल्ली बतासले विजय का बाजा सितै तालमा लम्क्यो लम्की रहो सदा अटल होस शार्दूल का चालमा लम्क्यो लम्की रहो सदा अटल होस शार्दूल का चालमा।
जय पशुपतिनाथ, जय माता गुह्यकाली, जय गुरु गोरक्षनाथ। आदरणीय दर्शकवृन्द, सधैँ झैँ आज पनि हामी उपस्थित भइसकेका छौँ गोरक्ष यात्रा कार्यक्रम लिएर र यो कार्यक्रम यहाँहरूको सामुमा विश्व हिन्दू युवा सङ्घले लिएर आएको छ र विश्व हिन्दू युवा सङ्घले भन्ने गरेको छ खोजी मौलिकताको अभियान समृद्धिको। यही सिलसिलामा हाम्रो गुरु गोरक्षनाथका पशुपतिनाथका शिष्यहरूलाई खोज्ने क्रममा आज हामीसँग हुनुहुन्छ एकजना अत्यन्तै सम्मानित पूजनीय वन्दनीय व्यक्तित्व हुनुहुन्छ र मैले आदरणीय दर्शकवृन्दहरूलाई चाहिँ विनम्रतापूर्वक अनुरोध गर्न चाहे। उहाँ एकजना विदेशी पाहुना हुनुहुन्छ र त्यसैले आज हामीले हाम्रो कार्यक्रम चाहिँ अङ्ग्रेजी भाषामा सञ्चालन गर्नेछौँ। यसको लागि म क्षमा पनि प्रार्थी छु र आउनुहोस् सबैभन्दा पहिले आजका हाम्रा आदरणीय अतिथि श्री ज्याक अल्ड्रिचज्यूलाई स्वागत गरौँ। उहाँ अमेरिकाबाट हुनुहुन्छ र न्युयोर्क निवासी हुनुहुन्छ। आउनुहोस् दर्शकवृन्द, सबैभन्दा पहिले उहाँलाई स्वागत गरौँ। स्वागत छ हजुरलाई कार्यक्रममा।
नमस्ते सबैजनालाई।
सन्चै हुनुहुन्छ?
सन्चै छ। अनि तपाईँ?
So that's great, Jack Aldrich. So would you please tell about your, childhood? Where were you born and what was your education? Something like this.
Sure. So I was born in a very small town in upstate New York, where there's just trees and cow farms and very few people. And I was born a twin, so I have a twin brother who's slightly older than me. His name is Sam. And I grew up in the middle of a forest. My house is in the forest, very quiet and beautiful. And I went to a very small public school with only 35 students in a graduating class for 13 years like this.
All right. You said you are twins, right? Like you have a brother, and you are just grown up together. So can you please say something about your parents, how they were and what was their sanskar, what was their cultures?
Yeah, so my parents, my mother is from Brooklyn, so she's from the big city. She's from New York City. And her heritage, her ethnicity is half Jewish and half Armenian. My father is from Florida, and he is mostly American. And both, and so they were older too. My parents are much older. My father is now 71 and my mother is 63. Yeah, and so being older, I grew up with people who were very kind of mature and very stable, and very calm and very creative and artistic and loving. Yeah, like this.
So, what was the job? What was the professions of your father and mother? Can you please speak about this? Because I am trying to relate that thing with your spiritual upliftment, spiritual quest. Can you speak about that?
Sure. So my parents are both musicians. They're both classically trained musicians, and my mother also plays folk music. And so they've always been involved in the arts, and they've always been involved in creative expression from the soul. This is how this is their dharma actually, is music. Their expression of their highest bliss is through music.
So since they were the musical people, so maybe we can say they were a little bit angelic type, or they were much spiritually inclined, and that ultimately motivated you to have a spiritual quest throughout the world. Was that true?
I would say that's a big part of it, because being musicians, they're very open-minded, and they didn't have a very customary or traditional kind of occupation, know. And so, and also because my grandfather, my mother's father, is a very spiritual man himself. He's also a musician and a composer of music, and so he was a Hatha yoga practitioner.
Okay, so like you said, like you have deeper impressions from your parents. Can you please speak some events about your early childhood, and that we can extract something that was the beginning of a big spiritual journey?
Yeah, so when I was young, I recall there wasn't any religion in my household, but whenever I saw an image of the Buddha, or usually in people's gardens in America, they have little statues, maybe just the head of Buddha Shakyamuni.
Like quite a meditative type of statue.
Yeah, it's very tranquil, peaceful, and garden with water flowing, fountain like this. And I always remember having a kind of reverential attitude toward that image of the Buddha, without knowing why and without thinking very much about it. And when people said, "Oh, I'm Buddhist" or whatever, I was always like, "Oh, I had some kind of respect, like inborn."
I mean, you are just telling us without anybody's guidance or spiritual explanations, you are having a kind of reverential, devotion towards that statue, and that might have a little bit of connections with your past life, that you used to practice Buddhism in your past life, maybe.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, they say that you don't connect with the Bodhidharma Marg, the path, if you don't have a past life connection at all. And and then to meet a guru, it takes a much, much bigger samskar from past life. And so these kinds of things I must have, just by the way I look at my life today, I know there must be deeper impressions from before. It has to be.
Maybe, I don't know whether you have gone through Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna talks about yoga chema, like the past lives, good sanskar, good karmas would lead a person towards a particular way. Maybe that's what you are referring, like you're having a reverential devotions to the Buddha's statue, means somehow you are a practitioner of this, maybe. Let me put the next questions. Like you are saying, your maternal grandfather was a Hatha Yoga practitioner. Can you associate with how that was connected to your spiritual journey later on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I said earlier that I had reverence toward the Buddha, but also always toward Hinduism as well. In my household, we knew what Om was, and we saw the symbol because my grandfather was a disciple of Sri Satchidananda, who was a Hatha Yoga guru who came to the West, who came to America in the late 1960s, and he opened a what's now very famous and popular ashram, actually, called Integral Yoga in Virginia. And my grandfather would go and do retreats there all the time. Okay.
So that had also impressions to your mind, to your subconscious mind.
And he was unusual because he was a very good yoga practitioner. He's not just doing it for having a sexy body or something. I remember him at age 70, 75, able to do a headstand. And these kinds of unusual...
Oh my goodness, that you are referring, your maternal grandfather was able to stand, headstand means heart, in Sirsasana. This is called in Nepali Sirsasana.
Sirsasana, yeah.
Then you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Did you practice sometimes like this type of asana?
We tried. And so he would hold us and tell us how to hold ourselves and how to do it. But it was always a little... Yeah, we practiced. We tried. Me and my brother would try, actually.
Maybe you're much luckier than me anyway, after this you happen to complete your school educations, then you started your bigger journey, a spiritual journey. Can you tell about that, please?
Well, actually, in the middle of high school, when I was 16, is when I was able to be an exchange student to Thailand. So I lived for 10 months in southern Thailand, in the home of 3 different Thai households, going to a public school, just kind of a normal life kind of experience there. And of course, I was exposed to Theravada Buddhism there also, there was actually an interesting encounter there I had with a monk who was a palm reader. This was actually a very important moment in my life, if I may add. Yeah, he said at the time that I will pursue Dharma this entire life. He said that's what this life is going to be about. And when I was 17, and that was very scary to me because I had my own ideas about what I wanted to do in life. And so I didn't like that idea at all. But now, later on, I see all the things he was saying, and he said many other things. They all came to pass. And now I feel I would love to devote my life. I am devoting my life to Dharma. So what he said was true, even though at the time I didn't like that.
So what you are narrating is, you came Thailand at the age of 16, and you happened to stay there for 10 months.
Yes.
And you met some gurus. So was that I mean, how far that place was from Bangkok?
Yeah, it was in the deep south of Thailand. So it's an hour plane ride or a 12-hour car ride into the south from Bangkok. So it's actually much closer to Malaysia.
Okay.
And it's beautiful. This is before Thailand unified. The city I was living in was the seat of the Southern Kingdom. Okay. Just like, yeah.
So you practice a little bit of palmistry? You were introduced to palmistry?
At that time, yeah, I was just thought, oh, okay, I would love to hear my fortune. And so at that time, I had a palm reading, but I've never practiced. I don't know anything about it.
That was completely an amazing experience, that somebody would look into your palm and saying you may be going to this way.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay, later on. So did you ever try Vipassana meditation? That's what we are much introduced to about Buddha's teaching, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was first introduced to Vipassana meditation in America in May of 2019, right after I graduated university. I did a 10-day course there into the lineage of S.N. Goenka and his parampara. And that was a very profound experience, also very, very difficult physically, because my body was not ready to sit for 10 days. My mind, I was ready to be silent. I had no problem being silent for 10 days, but my body was, my back, my knees, were screaming throughout that experience. But it was a very powerful experience all the same, and it was very profound. I would recommend it to anybody to try.
Yeah, even, well, like you said, you recommend. I even tried Vipassana meditation twice. Of course, it is, very highest techniques of meditations, but I could not practice it longer because it demands extreme discipline, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. Maybe it's related to the past life. Well, you were talking about Sachidananda Guruji. Like in the present days, there are so many gurus going to the United States and the Western world, like Vivekananda ji, he went from India, and Paramahamsa Yogananda, and that is the lineage of Mahavatar Babaji, and also has gone there, and Hare Krishna people, Srila Prabhupada ji went, and even nowadays the Sadhguru, Isa Foundation's founder Sadhguru is very famous in the United States. So how do you think, as a Western spiritual seeker, how do you think this big spiritual flow from the Nepal and India towards the Western country, particularly in the United States, how do you see these events?
Yeah, well, all of them, they all say that the West is very, very fertile. The earth for Dharma is very fertile. The minds of Western people, because for centuries the West has developed in materialism and in industry, and they have had no science of mind, basically, a science of yoga or of any kind of tradition that the East has been cultivating for thousands and thousands of years. And so over there, they're hungry for some kind of deeper spiritual meaning and path and any kind of knowledge that will give them great meaning in life, because they've realized, a lot of them, that the materialism that they have already conquered, so to speak, they have finished that.
They have reached to the summit of material success.
They have summited, yes. And they're still unhappy, and they're still depressed, and they're still relying on alcohol and other things to cope with their sadness. And so that is why there's great flourishing of these spiritual traditions in the West.
Okay. Like, you are telling, like, Western society is much materialistic, so there is a fulfillment of spirituality from the Indian subcontinent, and the Western people can help. If we can really collaborate with this spirituality and materialism fusion, that would be a wonderful, that would be the future of the humanity.
That's
isn't
right.
that?
And it's necessary, because it's not like spirituality can go back to some earlier incarnation of it, where we're all wearing dhotis and not using iPhones, because we have these iPhones, we have material technology now, and we actually, so these two have to continue to meet and join, because that's the reality we have. We have, spirituality is actually just realistic. It has to be realistic. It must use what we have.
This is the 21st century, and the world is media saturated world, because we know, like, America's Vice President Kamala Harris is a Hindu now. Right? So he's a Vaishnava, and there is next Democratic Tulsi Gabbard. I think she is also is Hindu, and like Mark Zuckerberg has the blessings of Neem Karoli ke Baba, that's what the people say. And Steve Jobs was blessed by Paramhamsa Yogananda, and these all great gurus. You know, how do you think like this? This is Western people who have achieved a massive success materially or political, let's say, in any spheres of life, and they have got the special blessings from the Hindu masters, basically from the Indian subcontinent. How do you relate that the divine is there and we have to follow this path? How can you relate that?
Well, I see it, I mean, if you're a master in whatever you're doing, if you're a master in music, if you're a master in dance, if you're a master in technology, then you will necessarily, by karma, meet other masters in other fields. And so, you know, and basically, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is basically a Western Mahasiddha, you know, he is a master of technological advancement. But somebody like Neem Karoli Baba, a Guruji, is a Mahasiddha of spirituality. And so necessarily, these kinds of minds have some chance to meet. And I also think, I mean, they're basically, you have to have so much merit and punya to have that kind of mind and that kind of wealth and things to become a Mark Zuckerberg. And so those kinds of people, even like a king, just like a king, you know, they always meet with gurus at the top. They're always meeting other masters at the top. There's something else I was going to say, but it slipped my mind just now about that. They're also seekers because they're trying to advance. They're trying to make something new. And so they're always looking for something better and higher. And spiritual practitioners, a sadhaka, is always trying to improve themselves, improve their mind, improve their condition, improve their realization.
Okay, so, well, like you practice Theravada meditations in Thailand, and you happen to come to India and Nepal. Can you just relate this story? How did you come to Nepal and India?
It was a very beautiful story. I've visited India one time. That was 4 years ago. I was only there for a very short time. But this time when I've come to Nepal, I was living in Thailand just before, and I was teaching English in a high school. And at that time, I had a holiday, my summer holiday. It was in February until mid-April. And so I thought, I want to come to Nepal and check out this institute called Rangjung Yeshe in Bodhanath, where they teach Buddhism. And so I wanted to come and visit and then go to India, go to Bodh Gaya after that. And I came, and I wound up getting stuck. I wound up getting stuck because of the COVID pandemic. And so I even went to I didn't want to leave. This is what happened. I had extended my visa and I was going. And I was I don't want to go, but I know the borders are all closing, and if I don't leave now, I won't be able to get back to my job, which I had a job and a contract. And so I reluctantly bought a ticket, and I go to the airport, and I walk in, and they say, sorry, your flight was canceled a few hours ago. And that was it. And the next 2 days later, the whole country went into its first lockdown. And so I was a little scared, but mostly very excited, because I thought, I'm meant to stay here. There's something more to be learned here.
How do you take that you're stopped by the pandemic? So would you take as a curse or a boon?
Huge boon. For me, it was a boon. Of course, for so many, it was a very difficult experience. But I have to say, I had the best year. One of the best years of my life was 2020. It was a year when most people were very hysterical.
All right. Well, you said like your best year. So how do you say that? What did you find in Nepal within this time duration? That's what.
So I came, there was so much momentum from that moment of realizing I would be stuck here. I had to stay here. My life had to change. You know, I had to deal with the job. I had to communicate, sorry, I cannot come back, and all sorts of other expectations, boop, gone. And so that was for most people also, it's a huge lesson. Whatever you think you're going to be doing tomorrow, maybe not. Maybe you won't even be alive tomorrow. And so what happened to me was I was able to stay in this Kathmandu Valley, which I find incredibly special and powerful and beautiful. And Nepali people, I was so pleased to meet and to be around. And so when the pandemic kept me here where I wanted to be, I felt it was a great, great blessing. And I was living alone. I had a little apartment outside of Bodhanath on Mahankal. And I just lived alone for the whole pandemic. I bought a pressure cooker the day before everything closed. So I bought a bunch of food, and I didn't speak any Nepali, you know. 8 kilo, 2 kilo, I could say this, you know, 8 kilo dal, I could say that. That's it. And so it was a very exciting and unpredictable time.
Okay, so what did you practice in these 2 years, that you are just referring as a boon? What really moved your soul? Can you tell that, please?
Yeah, so I had, I was practicing meditation and also some, Buddhist sadhana of the medicine Buddha. It's a kind of a very basic Buddhist tantric practice of visualization and generation. And besides that, I was meeting, part of the reason it was so exciting was because I was meeting all these other Buddhists and all these other, not just Buddhists actually, all these people who were here because of spirituality. And because they stayed because of spirituality. A lot of people fled, when they got these rescue flights organized by the embassy to leave Nepal.
Yeah.
And I was offered this also, but I said, I don't want to go. Why should I go back to America? I'm enjoying this. And so the tourists all left, and the people who stayed happened to be, a lot of them were like sadhakas. And so I wound up meeting so many people, not all sadhakas or anything, but it was like I had the experience of sangha for the first time.
Yeah, association.
Community, for the first time, really. And that was that was the biggest part of why my 2020 was a boon.
Okay. Just as you said sangha, in Nepal it is said jaisa sang, jasto sangha ustai ranga. Means like the associates, that you become the same like this.
That's right.
Like you said, you associated with some sadhakas people, or maybe all of them were not sadhaks. But are you just a Buddhist practitioner, or are you looking for, Hindu practice like a Kriya Yoga meditations is there, like a worshipping and astrology? Are you also practicing this sort of things?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I don't consider myself a sectarian at all. In fact, I only align myself with Buddhism because in my heart, that's what I feel is most fruitful. But at the same time, I also have great respect for all traditions, especially Hinduism and also Christianity. That was the point I was going to make earlier, was that Christ, they say, came to India.
Yeah.
We say Zuckerberg and masters of different traditions meeting.
Yeah.
This is always the case. Christ meeting Indian Hindu masters, Shaivites, anything like this.
Yeah.
But
there is still a documentary in BBC that just from 13 to 29 years of Jesus Christ time, last years of Jesus Christ.
So, but I also study Jyotish, Vedic astrology, and this was not something this is another sanskar I feel, because I was not looking to study this on my own, but in the summertime, this past summer, a friend of mine who doesn't believe or doesn't trust, has no shraddha in any spiritual path really, he sent me a link of a friend of his who was teaching a Jyotish, introductory Jyotish course. Okay. And so I thought, I felt like I would like to practice this, I would like to study this, and so I'm studying the Puranas, I'm studying the Vedas a little bit to understand, as a way to help me understand the stars and the grahas, nakshatras.
So do you have a little bit of wisdom regarding nakshatras? Because it is said in Nepal, like our temples are built up in the ancient time on the basis of these all nakshatra constellations, connecting points. So can you please say something about it, if you have?
About the nakshatras?
Yeah.
So the nakshatras, there are 27 nakshatras. In English, they're called celestial mansions, like what you were saying. And these are abodes, they're the abodes of various deities. So for instance, there's Kritika Nakshatra, which is a very clear, you can see in the sky every single night. At about 9 p.m. you can look up and you see them. In English we call the Pleiades, it's a Greek word. And so Kritika Nakshatra is in the sign of Taurus, and it's ruled by Agni. And so that's the deity's abode. So Agni abides in Kritika Nakshatra. And then you go one more, and it's Bharani Nakshatra. Bharani is ruled by Yama, Dharmaraj. And so all of these 27 stars across the 360 degrees of the sky, from the Earth's perspective, are the abodes of various deities. And so they impact us. And if you were born with, especially it's what's called the Janma Nakshatra, where your moon is located, that's very powerful impact on you, because the moon moves each nakshatra every night. One nakshatra every day. In fact, the moon is in Bharani, not Bharani, I got that wrong. Bharani comes before Kritika, but the moon is now in what's called Rohini Nakshatra, which is ruled by, who is it? Well, doesn't matter.
Well, like
Brahma, actually, Brahma.
In Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, he talks about these constellations and the planets having effects to our life.
Yeah.
So that's what our ancient sages and seers, they have developed a system of putting on some ring and in the fingers and with the stones for the defense of something ultraviolet rays or some harmful rays emitting from these planets. Maybe that was a science.
Yeah. Yogananda has a very beautiful thing he says in that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, because in his Kundali, it was predicted that he would have 3 marriages.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to have any marriages. He was, of course, a mendicant, and he was a sannyasi. And so 3 times his family tried to marry him, arranged a marriage, and 3 times he very strongly opposed. He had to summon so much willpower to oppose his parents' desire, to oppose that karma.
So that means like we are governed by our past life karma, but if we have a strong volition, that willpower, we can overcome that.
That's right. Nothing is fixed. There's absolutely nothing in your chart is dhruv, is fixed. Anything can be changed.
Can be changed,
And so that's why he talked about that. He said the point of knowing your karma, the point of knowing your astrological kundali is so that you have a better capacity to act within it, basically.
Okay. Jackson, can you please tell your further studies, because I am trying to associate this with the other philosophical things like string theory. People are talking about string theory and something like this. Please tell about your university study.
Yeah, so I didn't study physics in university, but of course in physics, like quantum physics in particular with the string theory, this is where it seems like the doctrines of the East and the West are really meeting right now.
Yeah.
However, like theories of relativity and of the universe. But I didn't study those subjects. I actually studied humanities. I studied languages. I studied Hebrew. I studied Arabic for 2 years. I speak Arabic now also. I studied other languages in university. I studied literature. I studied dance. And I studied Buddhism and philosophy. And my major was focused on the Middle East, but also on a modern day, like postmodern kind of philosophy that's very, very critical. And I was so lucky in university to meet a very, very famous and profound Buddhist teacher called Robert Thurman, who is a disciple of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and who has translated many works of the Mahayana and Vajrayana into English, and has been a huge, basically, wheel turner in America for Buddhism in America. And so he was a university professor in Columbia University when I was a student, and my brother was in his class, because my brother and I both went to the same school, university. And he said, Zach, you gotta come. You gotta come to these lectures. This man is really, really amazing.
Did you ever meet Dalai Lama? Because he's taken as a, great Buddhist master in United States, maybe.
I have never met him, but I very much hope to meet him in Dharamsala.
Put the next questions now. Like in Nepal, so many people are practicing Christianity, and the United States, many people are being Hindus. How do you see these events? It is the mind playing game, because mind always looks for a new thing. That's what the Nepalese people are going towards Christianity, and the Americans are going towards Hinduism. So how do you see these things?
Yeah, well, there's also many, many Americans who are going deeper into Christianity also, who are what's called evangelical Christians, or more fundamentalist, who are very, very serious about their faith. And there's a smaller minority who are coming to Hinduism and who are coming to Buddhism and other traditions in the East. And I don't know, it's just whatever people feel, however they meet. If you're born in Nepal, maybe you have the karma to meet some Christian missionary. And maybe if you meet them, you listen to them and you think, I don't care, that's not my path. I prefer to be a Krishna devotee or a Shiva devotee. But maybe your cousin hears the same person talk and thinks, oh, I want to follow Jesus Christ. So it really just depends on each person's own karma, I would say.
All right. So let me, if you permit, let me ask one political question. Do you want this political question?
Sure, let's go.
Because Nepal is in a debate of MCC, and that is a big grant given from the United States government. That's what people say, well, we are very much thankful and full of gratitude to the American people in general, because they are very open-minded and scientific and very generous people that we really, pay our reverence to them. But, the politicians and the policy of the United States is sometimes heavily criticized by the Nepalese people. In case of MCC, even some people are predicting like this is an Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States government, since they have built up more than 800 base camps, army base camps throughout the world, and they want to split Tibet and Taiwan, and they want to hit to the Three Gorges dams, and this is their policy to completely collapse to the China. And do you think this sort of things is happening, and how do you take this sort of things?
I totally think it's true, everything you said, because the reality about the American government and most governments is that all of their activities overseas are for self-interest, or from self-interested motivation. And so even aid projects where it looks like, oh, we've come to give you this really nice grant, or we've come to give you something like this, or a nice visa deal. There's never, in English we say there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Free lunch,
No such thing. So there's always some self-interested motivation, and because Nepal happens to be right next to China, Nepal is a very strategic location for an empire like the United States. And the other thing is, the United States doesn't care so much about religion as it does geopolitical strategy. So the United States was supporting Tibetan fighters, militias called Kampas, against the Chinese occupation in the 1950s and 60s. They were dropping weapons and training Tibetans, but it had nothing to do with supporting Tibetan Buddhism or any religion, even the Tibetan people. It was only about containing China. It's all war games from America.
Anyway, we pray to the Heavenly Father and the Divine Mother. The world should be peaceful, At least from the persons like you who are, a great spiritual seeker. So how do you introduce yourself after 10 years about the modern spirituality? How do you see the future of the humanity after 10 years in spirituality?
Yes.
That's my last question to you.
Sure. I think we're going to see humanity turning a lot more, especially the West, toward spirituality, because there are certain stress points, pressure points that humans are experiencing now that they were not experiencing before. The biggest one is climate change, climate catastrophe, and that's an existential crisis. And so existential crisis demands an existential response, which comes from spirituality oftentimes. And the COVID-19 crisis, I can say, has turned a lot of people's minds toward greater meaning, because they realize they can die at any moment. And so I think in the next 10 years, a lot of circumstances in people's lives may not get better in terms of the climate, in terms of epidemic diseases and these kinds of things, and migration and wars and water problems. And so usually it takes great crisis, great suffering for there to be great awakening.
आदरणीय दर्शकबिन्द, आज हामी थियौं गोरक्ष यात्रा कार्यक्रममा, र आजको कार्यक्रममा हाम्रा आदरणीय अत्यन्त पूजनीय अतिथि हुनुहुन्थ्यो ज्याक अल्ड्रिजी, र उहाँ अमेरिकाको न्युयोर्क सिटीमा बस्नुहुन्छ, र उहाँले आफ्नो आध्यात्मिक यात्राको सिलसिलामा उहाँ थाइल्यान्ड, भारत हुँदै नेपालमा आउनुभएको छ, र उहाँलाई हामीले शुभकामना दिन चाहन्छौँ मेरो व्यक्तिगत तर्फबाट र विश्व हिन्दू युवा सङ्घको तर्फबाट र सम्पूर्ण नेपालीहरूको तर्फबाट। एउटा एकदमै सम्पूर्ण धर्महरूलाई, सम्पूर्ण धर्मको सारलाई लिएर एउटा अध्यात्मको नयाँ गुरु बन्न सक्नुहोस्, र हाम्रो यो संसारको जननी गुरु नेपाल, यो देशबाट चाहिँ हामीले फेरि पनि विश्वको लागि शान्तिको सन्देश दिन सकौँ, यही प्रार्थनाको साथमा आजको कार्यक्रमको प्रस्तोतामा राजु बस्याल र हाम्रो आदरणीय अतिथि ज्याक अल्ड्रिजी लगायत हाम्रो आदरणीय टेक्निकलका साथी दिपेन्द्रजीलाई पनि बिदा दिनुहोस्। हस्त नमस्कार। जय पशुपतिनाथ, जय माता गुह्यकाली, जय गुरु गोरक्षनाथ।